Well, welcome to the Chicago Leadership Forum, and for today's presentation, How the Catholic Church Investigates the Supernatural. Today we have with us Michael O'Neill. Michael is a relevant radio host, author, and creator of the website miraclehunter.com, which is the top online resource on miracles cited worldwide in news articles and books throughout the world. Michael is also host of the weekly relevant radio program, The Miracle Hunter, and a frequent contributor to the Drew Mariani Show. His books include Exploring the Miraculous, 365 Days with Mary, and 20 Answers, Apparitions, and Revelations. Those books are on sale. They're up there in the corner there. So we'll turn over today's presentation to Michael.
Thank you. It's great to be here. Lots of familiar faces in the audience, including my father. Welcome. If you hear loud cheering in the back, you'll know the reason why. So today we're going to be talking about miracles. If any and I'm happy to share with you today how the Catholic Church investigates miracles. There's something beautiful and confusing about the way they do it. It's so strict. It's almost a little bit of a miracle anytime anything is declared a miracle because the criteria is incredibly tough. But I'm happy it's so difficult because when they do find a case where it's believable in the supernatural character of the event, I think that's a pretty exciting thing that we really celebrate and tell the world about. So people talk about miracles as if they're some sort of a vestige of the past, something that happened ages ago that are written in dusty books or come down to us through legends. They say, where are the miracles happening in today's world? Well, you have to go no further than Hobbs, New Mexico. This is a picture of a statue of Our Lady of Guadalupe, a bronze statue of Our Lady of Guadalupe in the parish called Our Lady of Guadalupe there. Over the summer, you may have read this news. It was even reported in the Washington Post and other major publications that on 4 different occasions, the statue of Mary began to weep tears of oil, as it was later tested. And they actually opened the statue up. They had cameras watching it around the clock. They made sure there was no leaky pipe from the ceiling. And they had no explanation for what was going on. In fact, the local bishop issued a statement saying that this appears to be some sort of divine intervention. Of course, there are no divine messages that come with a weeping statue, but it has inspired the faith of the people there in New Mexico and Texas and recorded on YouTube. So we have the new way of evangelizing, which is you can see miracles on YouTube if you look hard enough. So this is an incredible event that's happening in today's world. And if you look at any canonization cause where the Catholic Church elevates somebody to be a saint, they actually identify 2 miracles in order to prove that they're in heaven with God. So miracles are alive and well in our world. And believe it or not, in a survey of Americans that was released last year, over 80% of Americans say that they have received or witnessed a miracle at some point in their life. For all those people who say the only miracles that ever happened were in the Bible, and since then nothing has been around, they just need to talk to a few people because everybody's experience of a miracle, big or small, in their life, it seems. Here's another miraculous, quote-unquote, image of the Virgin Mary. When I lived in Boston, Massachusetts, I had this funny day where my secretary came running into the office out of breath, and she said that she had stopped her car in the middle of Route 9 to jump out to look at the Milton Hospital. There was a window there in which the Virgin Mary was supposedly appearing, and there were so many people there. They were coming there to witness it, to pray for healing. In fact, the crowds were so big that the police had to come and move them out and let people get healings the old-fashioned way, through the ER. So they were blocking the door to the hospital. Now, the Catholic Church took this window down and investigated it, And on the far right, you can see the close-up of that image. And you can see that it doesn't look as much like Our Lady of Guadalupe on further inspection, and they said it was just condensation in the window. Well, maybe Mary, as the Mother of God, can work through condensation or a grilled cheese sandwich or whatever is needed in order to evangelize and make her son manifest. But miracles are being claimed around the world. So let's sort of talk today about what is a miracle, and we'll go through that process of investigation. We'll go through the types of judgments that the Catholic Church makes, and what are we supposed to do as faithful when we hear a negative judgment, which would be a condemnation, or a positive judgment? What do we do as faithful Catholics? Do we have to do anything? So we'll finish with that. So let's go through what is a miracle. We all have different definitions of a miracle. Perhaps in sports, there are things that seem to be miraculous. People like to mention the Chicago Cubs winning the World Series a few years ago as being something that was rare outside of normal experience, I guess 108 years or so. Something worked for the good and beyond the power of humanity, implying divine intervention. If any Cubs fans amongst us saw that rain delay in the final game, surely that was a divine intervention, allowing the Cubs to reset and end up winning that game. Was it something worked for the good? Well, I'm a White Sox fan, so I might have another comment about that. And so what's the point of miracles anyway? Aren't they kind of a little unnecessary or showy or superfluous? Well, when you look at miracles, they bolster our faith, doesn't it? When we're doubting the existence of God, or when we see one of these moments where God touches our lives, this can really bolster our faith. And of course, when Christ worked miracles, it proved his divinity. Otherwise, he's just a great philosopher or teacher, isn't he? Those miracles prove that he was, in fact, God. And so when he was establishing the young church, he sent out the apostles and gave them a divine mandate to also work miracles. So without miracles, people don't believe in Christ and don't join the church, so they're essential. And throughout the ages, different saints have worked miracles or have had special insights through visions of Mary or other divine-inspired writings. But one thing to always remember is belief in miracles outside of the Gospels, those things that are referred as private revelation, they're not required to be a good Catholic. So if, for example, you thought that Our Lady of Guadalupe is just a painting, if you thought that, that's sort of a legend or a story, and you didn't really want to believe in it, you wouldn't have to. I think you'd be a little bit crazy to ignore her great impact, those 10 million converts in 10 years after those apparitions. You could say those miracles at Lourdes, those 70 inexplicable cures, or the 7,000 remarkable cures that they found there. You could say, well, science doesn't know what it doesn't know, and those aren't real miracles. You could say that. I think you'd be wrong, but you could say that. At Fatima, you could say those children were just making it up to try to get attention, and their stories of hell and everything else were just for fun. You could say that, but you'd probably be wrong. But as Catholics, we don't have to believe in miracles. God will still let us into heaven as long as we believe in the miracles of Jesus. And so where should we find our faith? We should find our faith in the words and works of Jesus Christ as taught to us in our Catholic Church. And we shouldn't be seeking miracles to satisfy a desire for curiosity or interest in magic. That's not the point of miracles at all. But let's turn from sort of that Debbie Downer rain cloud approach to miracles, and let's look at some of the interesting, fascinating things that have happened in our Catholic Church. And there's a lot of different phenomena. Here's a picture of Padre Pio, of course. It was his 50th anniversary of his death. I was just there in Italy with a pilgrim group, and I'll be going to France next year on pilgrimage. But this was a celebration of the greatest stigmatic and perhaps miracle worker in the 20th century. And you see this picture of him raising his hands. He's bearing the wounds of Christ, known as the stigmata. There have been perhaps 300 or more saints throughout Christian history who have borne the wounds of Christ. Some 2 wounds, some 5 wounds, one stigmatic, 65 wounds on her back. They all happen in different varieties. The varieties are different and confusing in the sense that why does God allow a difference amongst them? We'll talk more about that later. There have been numerous weeping icons. We talked about that icon in Hobbs, New Mexico. But here's a weeping icon from Syracuse, Italy in the 1950s. There was a couple who had just gotten married, and this statue was a wedding gift. Now, the wife actually became very ill. She had numerous diseases and problems. She went blind, and they prayed to Mary in front of this statue. When her eyes opened and was able to see again, the statue was crying tears. They were found to be human tears. It was tested by scientists. It was x-rayed. They found no internal ductwork. Hundreds of people claimed miraculous cures. Thousands of people lined up from around that town. It was so believable that the Pope hopped on Vatican radio and made an announcement that Our Lady of Syracuse was actually weeping tears. You don't need an investigative process when the Pope gets on the radio to declare a miracle as authentic. This is one of the absolute most convincing examples in history. One of the other interesting things in our Catholic Church is the incorruptible bodies of saints. Throughout the ages, there have been hundreds of saints who have been preserved in a state of perfection for some short time, for a long time. Sometimes it's 10 years, sometimes it's for centuries. This is one of the most perfect examples of St. Bernadette Soubirous of Lourdes, that visionary at 14 years old in 1858, who saw Mary and dug into the ground in a spring of water where there were cures coming from people all around the world seeking to honor Mary and looking for healing. People know me for my work on Marian apparitions, but believe it or not, Eucharistic miracles I find to be the most convincing miracles of all. We probably won't be able to convince too many atheists with miracles. We won't be able to say, well, you need to believe because we have so many interesting things happening in our Catholic Church. There have been people who have come around because of that, but if you're ever going to convince anybody, you'd turn to Eucharistic miracles. So you see Pope Francis pictured in this depiction. This is from 1996 in Buenos Aires, Argentina, when he was not Pope yet. He was Bishop Jorge Bergoglio. In this example, there was a priest who found a discarded host in his diocese, a consecrated host, and he reserved it in water, as is the tradition. And sometime later, he revisited that host, and it had developed some red stains on it. He brought it to the attention of the bishop, who said, send it to New York City to be investigated by a scientist. So that host sample was sent, and the scientist recontacted them and said, why have you sent me this sample of human heart tissue that has been tortured, a person, they would say. And they found it to be blood type AB. And so the question was, why would you send this sample to us? And when it turned out that it was a consecrated host that was sent there, that scientist converted from being an atheist to a Catholic and has ended up touring the country giving talks of his own, because not only was it heart muscle, but it was found to be living heart muscle. And when you look at the blood type AB, it matches the blood type of all the Eucharistic miracle samples around the world, AB. The blood type of the Shroud of Turin also is AB. You might say, well, what's interesting about AB? Well, it's a very rare blood type, but it is common amongst Middle Eastern men. So it's quite an interesting thing. And so this was one of the great Eucharistic miracles from around the world. There have been as many as 100 in countries spanning from Europe and South America and Asia. And so one day I hope they try to test the DNA of these samples. Wouldn't that convert a few people? Marian apparitions, I've studied those since the beginning of my website, miraclehunter.com. Here's a picture of the children of Fatima, of course. There have been as many as 2,500 alleged Marian apparitions throughout history. 28 times the bishops have validated them. 16 times the Vatican has recognized them as authentic. One of the most incredible experiences as my time as the Miracle Hunter was a project that came through National Geographic. And for people interested in this magazine, I've got a few copies in the back. And I got a phone call one day from the author of the article. Her name was Maureen Orth. And I think I probably thought it was a friend of mine trying to play a joke on me, because if you had asked me what magazine would be the least likely to put a cover story on Marian apparitions on their magazine, I would say probably National Geographic, because they focus on science, nature, and culture. And if you had asked me, you know, what magazine would you love to contribute to an article in, I would also say National Geographic, because as a kid, I just loved their stories. I loved their photography. So it was about the most exciting thing I could ever imagine. And so they contacted me, and Maureen Orth said, how would you like to be a content expert for the magazine? And I'm going to travel around the world. I'm going to go to Fatima, Guadalupe, Lourdes, Cabejo, Rwanda, Medjugorje, and I'm going to ask you all the stuff I need to ask all the people I interview. And I said, sign me up. So almost on a near daily basis for some months, I talked to either the editors of National Geographic or to the author of the article. And we talked about miracles, just on the hope that they might write a nice article that was respectful to Catholics and honored the Virgin Mary. I didn't expect that to be the case at all. I expected it to be a hit piece and make fun of Catholics as being silly and credulous. Actually, if you've read the article, it's one of the most beautiful articles about faith in Mary and our Catholic faith that you're ever going to read. So I encourage you to read that. One of my favorite aspects of the article was this map. It maps 2,500 data points from my Miracle Hunter website, and they're categorized as approved, condemned, apparitions to saints, or in process. So absolutely amazing that they devoted all this space and time to the visions of the Virgin Mary. Now, when we look at all that data, and I've got all the data, we look starting in 1545, because that's when the Catholic Church first began to investigate the miraculous. At the Council of Trent, they set up the first rules or the norms for investigating miracles. Prior to that point, they would just go through this process of prayerful discernment. Maybe it would be a local community. Maybe the parish priest would lead the charge. Maybe the bishop would be involved. But there was no formal process. People prayed. They said, this looks miraculous, and they would say it is. You could say, Our Lady of Mount Carmel. Some of us may wear a brown scapular. That seems like one of the most famous and approved Marian apparitions. Well, the church never investigated that. That's sort of a traditional one that sort of gained traction over the years. But if you look at the data, you can see that starting in the 16th century after the Council of Trent, over the following centuries, it was a pretty level number of miracles or Marian apparitions that were claimed. When you look in the 20th century, that spikes to the 500 or 600 claims in that time. And people may say, well, why did that happen, that so many people claimed Marian apparitions? Well, you can look in 1966. There's this dictionary called the Dictionary of Marian Apparitions, about this thick. Half the book is dedicated to apparitions before 1966, and half is dedicated to the year after 1966. And what is magical about that year? Well, Pope Paul VI, he issued a statement that said, you no longer have to talk to your local bishop about miracles. You can publish them if you want. You can write a book. You can put them in the newspaper. You can go talk publicly about miracles. You no longer have to check with your local bishop. Apparently, that restriction caused people to start reporting on miracles in a whole new way. And we have so many more cases after that announcement. And so when you look in the United States specifically in the 20th century, you only need to look at the 20th century to see a huge spike at the end, starting after 1981. If anyone in this audience knows what happened in 1981, that would be the visions at Medjugorje in Bosnia-Herzegovina began to be claimed. Now, these are alleged visions. I'll talk more about that later. Not approved by the Catholic Church, but possibly will be approved. But if you look at almost every single case of somebody who claimed a vision after 1981 in the United States, they had either visited Medjugorje or had become a promoter of Medjugorje. And so I don't want to suggest that it's true or false based on that, but it seems to be a case of apparition by contagion. People would go, catch the bug for Medjugorje, catch the bug for apparitions, and come back and report their own. Again, does that mean it's true? Does that mean it's false? Neither, but it sure is interesting. So people say, you've got all the data on Marian apparitions. So what is a typical Marian apparition? Because you'll hear this argument, well, Mary likes to appear in a very specific way, because if she doesn't appear according to her formula, it can't possibly be a real apparition. So what is the formula of Mary? So it likely will happen in Europe. It turns out that France, Italy, and Spain are her favorite vacation spots. Her average age to a visionary is age 16. Average number of visionaries is 2. She usually appears to students, shepherds, or religious. The number of visions is about 7, and it usually lasts for 3 months. And you'll see some asterisks next to the last 2 numbers because I cleaned this data to remove the cases where she appears thousands of times, because that would skew the data. But that is the most typical Marian apparition. So you might say, okay, well, what is the one that fits this data model perfectly? It is in Giertwald in Poland. In 1877, Mary appeared to 2 shepherdesses, Justina and Barbara. They were 13 and 12 years old. They had 9 visions, and it lasted for 3 months. And so this is the case right down the middle. And who approved these visions? It was this cardinal named Karol Wojtyła. John Paul II was the one who gave the final stamp of church approval on this one. Now here's some more bar graphs for you. You can tell I'm an engineer in a former life. turned miracle hunter. But in this case, we've got blue bars are for boys and pink bars are for girls, and the height of the bar indicates the age. And the clustering of the data shows when they were together in a group. And so on the far left example, you see St. Juan Diego, who was 57 years old at the time of his apparition in 1531. And you might notice that his is a real outlier. Most of the data shows that amongst the proved Marian apparitions, you see a much lower height of the bars, including a lower age. And so you'll see sometimes she appears to just one person, sometimes she appears to a group. Sometimes she appears to a group of girls and sometimes to a group of girls and boys. But for whatever reason, she doesn't appear to just a group of boys. Not sure why it is. It's just what the data shows. People will also make the argument, if I was young and I received a vision of the Virgin Mary, I would run out and become a priest or a nun. Because that's what you do when you have a vision of Mary. That's what she would want you to do. That's the point of God sending you a vision, is to enter religious life. Well, here's a picture of Sister Lucia Fatima, who along with St. Bernadette Soubirous are the two most famous nuns after a vision of Mary. You can see that in these cases, only 10 of 67, approximately 1 out of 7, did somebody say, well, God is calling me to the priesthood or to become a nun, I'm going to run off. Everybody else got married or lived a single life, so it is not the case. So it doesn't prove a vision true or false if the visionary has not entered religious life. When you look at the number of appearances, we hear this from Pope Francis even, that says, Mary is not a postmaster who delivers messages on a daily basis. It's not possible. He likes to think of Mary as the Mother of God in a different sort of a way. Well, apparently Pope Francis has never been to miraclehunter.com. I hope he visits my website someday. But it turns out that as the Mother of God, Mary can do whatever she wants to do. If she wants to appear just once, as she did at Knock or La Salette, or in Rome to Alphonse Ratisbonne, she appeared just one time. Other times she appears a handful of times, and other times she appears thousands of times. There's the case of Benedicta Rencourel in the year 1664 that was approved in 2008 by the bishop in France. They said that on one day she received a vision, and on every single day after that of her life, she also received a vision, thousands of visions. At Kabeho in Rwanda, which predicted the Rwandan genocide, those visions happened starting in 1981 and predicted the genocide in the 1990s. Those happened on a daily basis, hundreds or thousands of times to those children. So Mary can appear however many times she wants. So let's look at the process of miracle investigation. And so, as I mentioned before, that the church didn't always have this very strict process of investigation. Very early on in the 1400s, you had St. Bridget of Sweden, one of the greatest mystics and greatest saints in Catholic Church history. And she was a problem for the church hierarchy because she used to claim visions and report them to the Pope and expect him to listen. So she would talk about the Crusades and tell him when we should start, when we should end, when was too much, when was not enough. She also heard visions about how to do your laundry. And so she had a great breadth of visions. So they began to look at what should be a process for dealing with somebody like Bridget of Sweden. Then in the Fifth Lateran Council, the Vatican decided that all miracles needed to be reported to them before anything that could be declared authentic. I'm sure that got overwhelming when you consider how many miracles happen around the world, and perhaps in an idea of subsidiarity or just passing the hot potato, they moved it on to the bishops in the Council of Trent, starting in 1545. Benedict XIV, he wrote all the rules for miracles used in canonizations. And that was in 1840. It was the De Servorum Dei Beatificatione et De Beatorum Canonizatione. There's a little Latin for you. In that one, he said that miracles have to be complete, instantaneous, and lasting, and there can be no medical treatment that relates to the cure. That's the same exact criteria they use in the church today. And again, in 1966, Pope Paul VI issued the right to mass media, in which all those miracles were then reported to the world without checking with the local bishop first. Probably the most famous or the most common of miracles that we see are healing miracles. And we have this perception, perhaps it's from the movies, perhaps it's just our own imagination, that when somebody has a miracle, a good one, let's say our uncle has stage 4 cancer and prays and it goes away, We have this idea that, somebody on a phone, a red phone, picks it up and calls the Vatican and says, send in the miracle hunter, or send in a miracle hunter to investigate and report back on this incredible case. Well, it doesn't happen that way at all. Well, the Vatican has never employed me. Maybe someday they will, but they don't actually investigate miracles that just happen in regular life. If you talk to your local priest, if you talk to your bishop, they might say, congratulations, this is a great blessing, this is a beautiful thing, sure does sound miraculous, but they'll say, that's all we're going to say. They won't investigate any further, no matter how spectacular the healing is. And so there are only two places in the world where they investigate healing miracles. At Lourdes in France, pictured here in this black and white photo, and at the Consulta Romana in Rome, where they look at cures for canonization causes. And so in France, following those visions to St. Bernadette Soubirous, she was digging a hole in the ground. She was losing some people. People thought she was a little bit crazy to dig in the ground, and a spring of water came forth. And people began to bathe in that water. And there were so many cures of people who would just dip in that water and pray. And those cures were actually posted all around that church that was built there. And so eventually they said, we need a form of regulation. So they started the CAMIL, the Commission of the International Medical Commission of Lourdes, that looks at these cures. And so, again, it needs to be an instantaneous, complete, and lasting cure. And they've only validated 70 cures throughout history. And you might say that is a tiny, tiny percentage. This must be some sort of psychosomatic thing or placebo effect for only 70 cures to be that remarkable. Well, the criteria is remarkable. I've actually interviewed somebody who is a member of that commission, and I said, tell me the story of a miracle that sounded really good, but that didn't quite pass muster. So he said, there was a woman who was blind, a grandmother, and she went to Lourdes and she bathed in the water and she prayed, God, please grant me the healing miracle that my blindness is cured for just one day so that I might return home and actually see my grandchildren and pray the rosary with them. And then you can take my vision away. I just want that experience with my grandchildren. So she went into the waters, came out, and her vision was 20/20, absolutely perfect. So she rushed over to the medical commission and said, I'm healed. I think this is a real miracle. And they looked at it and they tested her vision 20/20. Sure enough, all her records indicated she was completely blind previously. And they looked at her and they said, this is remarkable. God bless you. Congratulations on this experience. But they said, we're not going to count it amongst the 70 cures. And the reason is because the pathology in her eye was not returned. So whether it was macular degeneration and her macula were imperfect or the rods and cones were wrong, I don't know the science exactly, but they hadn't restored to a state of perfection. They were still in a state that shouldn't be able to see anything. I don't know, that sounds like a miracle, doesn't it? But they said, no go, not a miraculous case. So absolutely incredible, the criteria. Just this past year, they announced miracle number 70. There was a nun, actually, who had received something like 7 back surgeries on her spine. And she went to Lourdes in a wheelchair. She could not walk. And she went into the waters of Lourdes, and she literally walked out of those waters. And so she was so excited to be able to walk that not only did she hobble around a little bit, but she walked 5 miles the next day in celebration. This was an absolutely incredible thing. So this past year, number 70 was declared. And so there have been 7,000 remarkable cures beyond those that have been said to be without natural explanation. And so perhaps they'll be reviewed. The Catholic Church waits a long time to actually declare any of them to be authentic. And so they will wait perhaps 10 years, especially in cases of cancer. They'll make sure that the disease does not come back. And if you had a cure and you were from cancer, but you were hit by a bus, then they wouldn't count that because it didn't last the 10 years. And the other thing is that you actually have to pay on your own dime for your miracle investigation. So if you visited on pilgrimage, got a great cure, came back, you'd have to contact your own doctor, contact your diocese, and then pay for several trips back to France to be investigated by their medical commission and get all the paperwork sent back and forth, do all the legwork in order for your miracle to be validated. So 70 cures doesn't seem like a lot, but it seems like there's a huge process that you have to go through. Now, the other place where they look at miracles is in canonizations. And so there has to be 2 miracles. It used to be more, but Pope John Paul actually changed that criteria a little bit. He's considered to be the great saint maker. There have been so many saints that have been named under him. And so when we look at miracles in canonization and beatification, there have to be 2. And so the first one is for beatification, and these miracles show that the saint is in God, with God in heaven, interceding. And so the second miracle has to happen after the beatification. So if you're a saint who has stockpiled a bunch of miracles, you can't just put out 2 and get canonized really quick. What they do is they beatify you, and then they wait for another miracle after that, sort of a ratification from heaven of the processes of the church. And so perhaps the closest case I've ever heard of was with St. John Paul II. A woman was at home. She couldn't walk. She had some serious diseases. She saw the beatification of John Paul II on television. And for whatever reason, she said, now that's somebody I need to pray to. So after the beatification ended, she prayed to John Paul II and had sort of an interior locution of John Paul II assuring her that she'd be fine. She got up and walked and sent her miracle to Rome, and that was the one that was used. It just barely happened after the beatification, but it still counted. And so we also talk about the intercession of a singular saint. So I don't know about you, but when I'm in trouble, when I'm not feeling well, or a family member needs prayers, or there's a financial crisis, I don't just pick one saint. I pray to all the saints. I send my prayers to heaven, hoping somebody picks up the phone. Just anybody, please help me. In the case of canonization miracles, you have to pray to just one saint. And you think about it, it makes perfect sense, right? You approach your bishop or you send it to Rome, and you say, I prayed to Mother Teresa and John Paul II and St. Francis and the Little Flower and this new potential saint. I think it's the new potential saint. And the church will say, congratulations on your beautiful miracle story. However, there's no way we know which of these saints that you've prayed to actually worked the favor for you. So thank you for your submission. So it has to be a singular intercession. So you say, what does it look like, a singular intercession? You can look at the case of Fulton Sheen. There's a miracle that's been approved for him. He'll be a blessed someday, I'm sure. And so in that story, there was a baby in a home birth who was born stillborn. And that child was rushed to the hospital, was not breathing for over an hour. And that mother began to invoke Fulton Sheen. And the father jumped on the phone and called his friends and said, pray specifically to Fulton Sheen for our child's survival. And the child came back to life. The child was born and was breathing. And the doctor said, well, don't celebrate too much because he's going to have severe brain damage as a result of this. And sure enough, the child grew up. 10 years later, they looked at him in perfect health, no signs of this traumatic experience, and his name is James Fulton. And so that was the miracle that was submitted to Rome, and they said a case of singular intercession. And if you look at the case of Mother Teresa, there was a man with encephalitis who was going in for an operation, and his wife jumped on the phone and said, let's pray a novena to Mother Teresa specifically at the parish. The parish priest got everybody together. They prayed to Mother Teresa, and when the time of the operation came, the man sat up on the table before the operation came and said, what am I doing here? They did the testing, encephalitis completely gone, all through Mother Teresa. And so these are cases of singular intercession. Now, other criteria, there can be no special bodily signs in death. If you've got an incorruptible body or a sweet-smelling corpse or a glowing corpse, these are all things that are absolutely incredible, but will not prove that you're in heaven with God. The Catholic Church will put it in your saint file and say, looks pretty good, we're going to consider this later, but according to the rules of Prospero Lambertini, Pope Benedict XIV, he says incorruption cannot be used to indicate sainthood. There can be no bodily signs in life. So even if you've got the stigmata, even if you're a levitating saint, again, good one for the file, but they will never say, well, he was so holy in life, he's definitely a saint. Because as we all know, we're tempted all the way to the moment of our death, and they need to show that the saint is in heaven with God, has made it there. And that's what, and they're not in purgatory, they're in heaven with God. So that's what the intercessory miracles imply. The final criteria, thaumaturgy, it's a fancy Greek word. It cannot be used. So even if you are a great miracle-working saint, Father Solanus Casey was just beatified last year in Detroit. I've interviewed his vice postulator, Brother Richard Merling, who has said they have cabinets and cabinets full of miracles. People would come to their door, say, "Can I talk to Father Solanus? Father, my brother was in a car accident," or "We've got great financial difficulty," or "We need your prayers." And he would pray and he would say, "Don't worry, everything will be all right," in his very simple voice. And there are cabinets full of these documents of people saying, "He prayed for us and things turned around." So tons of miracles for Solanus Casey, but he had to die first and then a miracle found, and now they're looking for one for his canonization. And so when we look at the criteria for a miraculous cure, we can look at this movie called Miracles from Heaven, which was Jennifer Garner a couple of years ago as the main actress. And she played the mother, Annabelle Beam, or Christy Beam, and the daughter's name was Annabelle Beam. And I interviewed the mother, and I was invited to interview Jennifer Garner as well on my radio show. And I bring up this example because this was a Protestant miracle. This wasn't a case that they had Lourdes water or it was for a canonization, but I like to talk about it because it absolutely lays out how difficult it is to fulfill all the criteria. So in this case, Annabelle Beam was a young girl who had a severe gastrointestinal problem. They went to all the top doctors in the United States and they said, she cannot be cured. She's going to die from this disease. All we can do is try to make her feel a little bit better. And so in this particular case, the main scene of the movie, the ultimate scene of the movie is she's playing up in an oak tree with her sister, and she falls out of that tree and comes plummeting to the earth over 25 feet. And the mother rushes to her, and she's completely knocked out. She has a concussion. They take her to the hospital. Eventually, she wakes up, and not only has she not died from that fall, not only does she not have severe brain damage, etc., she is completely cured of her gastrointestinal problem. Absolutely incredible. It's a miracle. I'm the miracle hunter. I say that's a miracle. And so, but if we were to apply the Catholic Church's strict rules, it wouldn't be a miracle. And I'll tell you why. So the first criteria is that the disease is serious, which it was, impossible to cure by human means, which it was, and it's not going to go away on its own. There can be no medical treatment that relates to the cure. So even if they gave this girl medical treatment, nothing was working. So that one applies. It has to be a spontaneous cure. She fell from the tree, hit her head, spontaneous. It has to be complete. It lasted over 10 years. In this case, perfect. It has to be permanent. Can't go away. So in this case, it meets all the criteria. So what's the final criteria? There can be no crisis which could potentially create that natural cure. So the crisis of hitting your head, falling from a tree, would be the thing that they would say, we don't know if it's a case of spontaneous remission. We don't know. And so I'm not saying the Catholic Church looked at this case, but if they did, they would say, beautiful cure, wonderful miracle, but, we're not going to use it. We're not going to approve it as supernatural. Now, aside from healing miracles, the other place where they use a very strict formal criteria that's been established is in the Marian apparitions that are claimed around the world. Here's that map again, the visions of Mary, 2,500 throughout history. Some have been approved, some condemned, some in a middle state. And I'm just going to go through how the Catholic Church looks at these things. And so there's a secret document that was released in 1978. It's called the Norms of the Congregation for Proceeding and Judging Alleged Private Revelations and Apparitions. And if you think that's a mouthful, you should try the Latin. And so this was released in 1978 to all the bishops of the world in secret. It was a sub secreto document. And what did that document say? It said, in cases of Marian apparitions or other private revelation, the local bishop is the main authority for starting an investigation. And then the National Conference of Bishops can intervene beyond that. And then the Vatican can intervene beyond that. It can escalate up in church authority if these various levels can't handle it. And there's been only one case throughout history that has gone all three levels in my study. Does anybody know what case that might be? That is Medjugorje. Those alleged apparitions starting in 1981 that have gone on for over 35 years with over 35 million people going to Bosnia-Herzegovina to see alleged visions of Mary almost on a daily basis to 6 children there. And so it's in the hands of the Vatican now. After it started with the local bishop who gave it a negative judgment, the Bishops' Conference gave it a maybe judgment, and then Pope Francis has got that hot potato to deal with now. And so when they investigate these miracles, according to that document, they assess the phenomena and the people. And so if it just shows to be, it just looks fake, they'll say no go. They'll look at the messages and they'll say, do these things line up to church teaching? And then they'll look to make sure there are good spiritual fruit. So we're talking about conversions, vocations, other miracles that come up as a result. And so let's go through the types of judgments. I like to say that you can use your thumb to figure out, what we're doing here. So we've got a positive thumb, thumbs up, a thumbs down, and a sideways thumb for the wait and see judgment that the church gives. And in that sideways thumb, the maybe, the official Latin formulation is non constate supernaturalitate. It is not established as supernatural. It might be supernatural. It could be supernatural, but it's not established as supernatural. And the miracle might or might not be supernatural. And the messages contain nothing contrary to church teaching. So there's no such thing as a vision that's true, where they say this is definitely from God, but the vision or the messages don't line up, that they don't match church teaching. So they'll never say that. But theoretically, if I wanted to, I could make up a vision if I wanted. I could say, pray the rosary, go to Mass, be kind to your neighbor, change your life, turn to God. Those are all good messages, but clearly there would be no miracle in place. So the church would say, maybe, but we don't think so. We don't know. Here are some famous examples of faith expression where the church has said, okay, you can put your faith in this, but we're not saying if it's supernatural or not. The one on the bottom, the Virgin of Revelation, there was a man named Bruno Carnacchiola, and I actually was able to visit this place on pilgrimage in Italy this past year. And this was at Tre Fontana, the place where St. Paul's head bounced 3 times and 3 fountains were said to spring forth. But there was supposedly a vision of Mary in 1947 where there was a man named Bruno who actually had this plot to kill the Pope. He really didn't like the Catholic Church. And so much, he disliked it so much, he had a dagger inscribed with death to the Pope on it. And he put that in his pocket, and he was on his way, walking in Rome. And he stopped by this place called Tre Fontana, and believe it or not, the Virgin Mary was there. And she convinced him in a very easy fashion to give up on his plot to kill the Pope. And eventually he converted to Catholicism, and for his very first confession, he went to the Pope. And how would you like that confession? Bless me, Father, for I have sinned. I have had bad intentions to assassinate you. That probably was an interesting moment for the Pope. But he got forgiveness, and the Catholic Church actually approved it very quickly, within a month or two, for faith expression, but it's never been judged to be supernatural. So maybe someday that will be one of the supernatural ones that are judged. Now there's the negative judgment, the constate non supernaturalitate. It is established that there is nothing supernatural going on, definitely not supernatural, and the devotion should cease. So if you're putting your faith in something where the Catholic Church has given it a condemnation like this, I would say you really need to move on and pick something else to spend your time on. There's all these famous examples, Lourdes, Fatima, Guadalupe, that are absolutely beautiful. It makes no sense to be hung up on a Marian apparition that just doesn't even pass the initial test of the church. So what are the criteria that this 1978 document lays out? So they look at the facts. If there are glaring errors in the facts, if somebody says, I saw Mary on this day, but clearly it was another day, doesn't add up. If things just don't make sense, they'll rule it out. If there are doctrinal errors attributed to Mary or to God, that's going to get a red flag. So, for example, there's this apparition where Mary says that she is the 4th member of the Blessed Trinity. You think about it a little bit, even the math doesn't work out on that one. That's clearly a negative one. So, pursuit of financial gain. If you're charging $5, pay me $5 and come see my apparition, that will get thrown out as well. If there are gravely immoral acts committed by the visionary, that will be a sign that's not authentic. And if the visionary is just plain crazy, again, the church will go through the testing on that and say, this is a red flag. This isn't an authentic vision of Mary. And so we also look at humility. So we talk about the person who's endowed with supernatural gifts, never boasts of them, never flaunts them, and above all, shows complete obedience to the ecclesial authority. That's what Pope Benedict XVI talked about, St. Hildegard von Bingen. She's a doctor of the church. She had these visions, and she was so careful about them. She said, I don't even trust my own mind. I don't know if I'm crazy. I don't know if it's the devil, but I will submit to church authority before we say these visions are authentic. And that's what she did. And eventually the church said that these are true visions of Mary. Now we look at the famous negative examples. Here's one from the Catholic Church in 1949, this woman named Mary Van Hoof. And there's actually a shrine there, even today, if you go there in Wisconsin, dedicated to this Our Lady of Necedah, Wisconsin. And so there's this woman who began to claim these visions. They sounded nice and they sounded interesting, and tons of people came. And there were even priests and some bishops who stopped by to take a look. And it was all sounding interesting. Was this woman authentic? But then she began to go off the rails, and she started to say, UFOs will descend to the earth and begin to take the faithful to heaven. Well, I'm sorry, but you can't say UFOs and hope that the Catholic Church will approve that one. That was roundly dismissed. It was condemned, and they said nobody should follow this, but there's still a shrine there. Even today, and I even get emails and prayer cards from the Necedah Shrine. Even today, there are still believers in this, believe it or not. Another famous one, 1970, Bayside, New York, Veronica Lucan, Our Lady of the Roses. There's even a small shrine there today where Veronica began to have these ecstasies and visions, and she began to claim to hear messages of Mary. People began to come in huge numbers to Bayside, New York. Again, people still believe in this, and one of the things that made the Catholic Church rule it out was that she said, there is now an imposter pope sitting on the chair of Peter. You cannot say imposter pope and hope that the Vatican will approve that. It just won't happen. And so that was roundly condemned, and there's still a small shrine there, and still believers in this even today. Now, the one that we get really excited about is the positive judgment, the thumbs up, where they say, constate supernaturalitate. It is established as supernatural. So it's worthy of belief in the supernatural character. So it's not only that the messages sound fine, that there's nothing dangerous about them, but that actually they believe a miracle happened. And of course, it's nothing contrary to faith and morals. And so we talk about there being moral certainty in the miracle. They're positive qualities of the visionary. The visions have good content to them. They're not claiming strange things. They're not trying to add to church teaching. They're just reaffirming the truths of our church. And healthy devotion and spiritual fruits. There are vocations, conversions, other miracles. Not such a distraction, but actually increasing the life of faith. On my radio show, I've been so lucky to interview Bishop Hector Cardelli from Argentina, who was last year actually approved the apparitions in San Nicolas, Argentina, as authentic and supernatural. And that was an interview in Spanish that he did on my program. And he said that there were healthy fruits, the visionary is an upstanding person, and that there was moral certainty that this was a miracle. And so this was the most recently occurring of all Marian apparitions that's been approved. And so when the local bishop looks at it, he makes an inquiry, he makes a decision on the supernaturality, and then he says the devotion may go forward. So he gives sort of the green light that people may engage in the devotion. And the Vatican may or may not have anything to do with it. They can ignore it completely, they can sort of recognize it, but it's really the local bishop who makes all the decision with Marian apparitions. I was so blessed in 2010 on December 8th to be in Green Bay, Wisconsin for a historic event. This has only happened one time in the entire history of the United States where a Marian apparition has actually been declared authentic. And so I was there for the Mass, I was there with Relevant Radio for the broadcast, but I was especially interested to see how Bishop Ritkin would make this special announcement. And it's very clear that he followed that 1978 rule book, because if you look at each statement, it is from that rule book. So he says, I declare with moral certainty, in accord with the norms of the Church, that the events, apparitions, and locutions given to Adele Bryce in October of 1859 do exhibit the substance of supernatural character, and I do hereby approve these apparitions as worthy of belief, although not obligatory by the Christian faithful. So, following every step along the way, that was an approval from Bishop Ritkin. Now, what about the Vatican? You hear many people say, well, is that apparition Vatican approved? Well, there's really no such thing as Vatican approval. They only give a sign of recognition, which I like to say is a little bit of cement on top of what the bishop has said. Theoretically, one bishop could flip over the judgment of a subsequent bishop. So if a bishop comes in and says that doesn't look good, or we've found new information, then they'll discourage the devotion, or they'll cancel it completely. It could happen. It's extremely unlikely. But what can happen is the Vatican can give recognition. And when they do, they're sort of cementing it for all time and for all places. They will never overturn something that the Vatican has said is authentic. So what do? They might release a document that says this apparition in Green Bay, Wisconsin, was authentic in 1859, and we recognize it. They could do that. They might build a basilica on the spot So in Wisconsin, if they elevated that tiny little chapel and put a basilica on top of it, that would be the sign of Vatican approval. Now, if the Pope, when he visited Boston, New York, Philadelphia, if he had taken a little side trip to Green Bay, Wisconsin, that would have been an approval if he had set foot on that shrine. And we talk about when he visited Sarajevo in Yugoslavia area. If he had gone to Medjugorje, as people were asking him to do, the optics on that would have been such that that would have been approval from the Pope. So he said, there's no way. If he sent a golden rose, if he made a feast day out of Our Lady of Good Help, if he composed a prayer to Our Lady of Good Help and dedicated the United States to it, that would have been a sign of approval. Or if he canonized Sister Adele Bryce and said, this is a saint in our Catholic Church, because there's no such thing as a life of holiness that involves lying about visions. It just doesn't add up. So if you approve somebody to be a saint, the visions they claim are also approved by the Church. And so there are two types of Vatican recognition, one traditional, one investigated. Before 1545 are the traditional ones. After that, they do a careful scientific study of anything that's claimed. And here are some very famous examples of ones that have been claimed and not investigated, but the Catholic Church puts its full approval behind. On the far left, you see Our Lady of Pilar, where Our Lady in 40 AD was said to appear to St. James as he was despondent about evangelizing. She appeared and said, buck up, and here are some ideas. And he became one of the greatest evangelizers in church history. Our Lady of the Snows in 352, there was a wealthy childless couple who was wondering what to do with their money, and they prayed about it, and Mary appeared to them in a dream. They said, go to the top of this hill in Rome. And sure enough, the next day when they did that, the Pope was there waiting for them. He had had a dream as well, and outlined in snow in the middle of summer was St. Mary Major's floor plan. So a little bit of money turned that into the greatest church in all of Italy at that time. Our Lady of Walsingham in Rome, you have the Anglicans and Catholics who honor Mary there. And also we have places like Our Lady of Mount Carmel, Our Lady of Good Help, the Lords of the East in India, Our Lady of Lavang, which happened in 1798. Mary appeared to all these survivors of war. Our Lady of China, 1900, never investigated by the Church, but still recognized as completely approved. Now, here are the most famous examples of approval of Marian apparitions. We have Our Lady of Guadalupe from 1531, Our Lady of Lelot in 1664 to Benedicta Ren Querelle, the Miraculous Medal, and I'll be going there to France next year in September. That'll be one of the places we go to. Our Lady of La Salette, Our Lady of Lourdes, also France. Our Lady of Knock, the famous Irish apparition that was visited recently by Pope Francis and, of course, John Paul before him. Our Lady of the Rosary of Fatima, and the Mother of the Word in Kibeho, Rwanda, where she foretold of the Rwandan genocide. And because of the details that she went and predicted, that was one of the reasons that the local bishop said this is definitely an authentic vision of Mary. And so as we wrap up today, we look at what are our responsibilities as the faithful. These are all interesting and perhaps inspirational events throughout history, and we should use them if they help our faith to draw closer to Mary, draw closer to Christ. But we have no obligation to believe in any of them, even if they're declared worthy of belief. But we do have a moral obligation when the Catholic Church says, cease and desist, don't bother with that apparition or that devotion. We should just leave it be and turn to other things that help our life of faith. So in summary, these are great miracles in our church. They can all give us reason to have confidence that a loving Father is watching out for us. He sends the Mother of God to us to influence our lives and to give us inspiration. So thank you so much for your kind attention today. And if you have any questions about miracles or otherwise, I'd be happy to answer them. Thank you so much. Question, yes.
I'm trying to remember the cancer saint, St. Peregrine. Right?
Yes, correct.
Jesus came down from the cross and touched his leg. It seems like the appearances of our Lord versus Our Lady, that sort of, Mary seems to have sort of taken that on, right, in recent centuries. So then, why are there, well, we had Sister Faustina, Jesus spoke to her in locutions and so forth, but is there any thought that's gone into that, why it might be that it seems Our Lady's assumed this role so much in recent centuries?
So this is a great question, and this is a question I've given a lot of thought to, and I don't have an answer to. why so many visions of Mary and so few visions of Jesus? Of course, St. Margaret Mary Alacoque, you have the Divine Mercy visions. These are some of the most famous visions in world history. But why so many more of Mary? And this might be a question when we get to heaven. We can ask that one when we arrive. But in pondering this, we think about our own mother and how gentle and comforting it is to have our mother be with us in our time of need. And so perhaps in her maternal role, this is the reason that Mary appears to people in that way. And the other aspect, too, is, of course, Christ is God appearing to a person. And perhaps that is overwhelming for some people as well. So we don't know the answer why so many more times of Mary, but this appears to be a mission that she has been tasked with to bring healing, to bring comfort, to bring intercession, to dispense God's mercy in her own way. So we don't know the answer to that, but definitely the data shows exactly what you're saying. Thank you for that. Another question? In the back, yeah.
Mike, you mentioned the National Geographic story of Mrs. Marsh when she called you. And could you give us a little background on exactly how you were able to get this very secular magazine, National Geographic, to actually write this very positive story on Mary? I mean, did they accept it immediately, or did you have to deal with them on an extended basis?
That's a good question. The question is what about National Geographic? Why did it come out so positively when we would all expect it to be sort of a negative article? Well, two things. Maureen Orth wrote a great, beautiful article from the very beginning. But after it was written, when I didn't get to see the article, I had to deal with the editors quite frequently. And when I talked to them, I tried not to portray myself as this overly pious, believing in everything Catholic, who they could safely ignore and find somebody else. So I just gave them the straight dope. I said, this stuff is true, this is false, this is a legend, this doesn't make sense, but this does. And so I gave them enough negative things, say, these are not worthy of belief, this is an exaggeration, this is not real. But I did put my focus on the things that I really did believe were miraculous, or I did believe there was some proof behind. And so I think they appreciated sort of the balanced approach. I wasn't just shoving everything at them, I was giving them a select thing to bite on. So I think that was part of it, but it was a big effort on almost a near daily basis working with them to try to, I definitely know, especially with Our Lady of Guadalupe, they were going to try to push the angle of it being a painting or a myth. They were really interested in that, but I fought them very hard on that. And if you read the article, you'll see it's absolutely beautiful. And a lot of it is a cultural kind of thing where they talk about Mary as being her influence with people and the faithful throughout the ages. How many churches, how many devotions, sort of the impact of Mary. So those are all facts, and those are all things that they can write about. So. But in the end, they handled it really well, and I was so happy when I opened it up that it wasn't a hit piece on Catholics. It was actually pretty positive. But if you tuned into the Nat Geo Explorer special, which I was also a part of, that was a hit piece on Catholics. So that was a tough one. They invited me to be interviewed for that, and I agreed to do it. But that was just as negative as the article was positive. So they kind of tried to balance things out, probably for their readership. Yeah, thank you.
Mm-hmm. And you were on, which shows I you're on?
Megyn Kelly, NBC Today, yeah. Mm-hmm.
So do you think that the secular part is starting to shift to say, wait a minute, there is more to this? I mean, the interview, I think, went pretty well. Mm-hmm. What do you think? Are you in more demand? Or do you see it shifting?
Well, so the question is there a shift amongst the secular world? Well, I would love to say the answer is yes, but I'm not sure. I've been so blessed to be invited by Dr. Oz and Megyn Kelly and Fox News and National Geographic. These are all great secular outreaches. And I feel very blessed to be in the position I am because I don't think they're really going to ask a priest or a bishop or a nun to get on one of these shows and to talk about faith. They probably won't do that. But because I'm focused on this strange miracle world, everybody's interested. Whether you're a believer or a skeptic, you're interested. If you're a skeptic, you need to have an answer for what all this stuff is. Because, if there are people claiming these miracles, if there are some proof of these miracles, you have to have an answer, because then you have to reform your own life if miracles are really happening, because that implies God is there. If there's a God, then is there a morality? If there's a morality, how does my life match up to that morality? So, I think people are interested. So they either want to say, yes, these miracles happen, or they definitely don't. But in any case, people want to talk to me, which I'm grateful for. It's a great place to be in. So whether or not more and more people are going to be asking questions, I don't know, but it's a great place to be. Thank you.
The miracle or the saints move people, or emperors, like Guadalupe, or you find that there's some that is really.
So the question is there a specific Marian devotion that's the most moving? And I always like to think of them a little bit like baseball teams. We've all got our own. Whether it's the city we live in, or our father is a certain fan of this, or we just like that one team won the year that we started to watch sports. We all have a reason for connecting to Mary in a different way. And they're all Mary. I've got this image, the faces of Mary, that I made with a computer, and it's sort of all the images of Mary from around the world come together to form one picture of Mary when you step away. And the reason I did that is because Mary comes to people at many times, many places, with a different message, but all of them lead to Christ. And so, would you say one Mary is more effective than the others? There's probably some data on that. I mean, Our Lady of Guadalupe has had more conversions as a result of her miracles and her apparitions than anybody else, perhaps. The historian Motolinia, he said 9 million conversions in 10 years following 1531. So it would be hard to beat that number. The miraculous medal, the largest medal in distribution, 1 billion, I should say, have been sent around the world. That has had some big impact. And some of the largest churches in the world were built as a result of Marian visions. You have 5 of the largest 12 around anywhere in the world are because of a Marian apparition. So those all had big impact. But could you actually measure which one has been the biggest one? Probably not. But the great thing is there's something for everyone. Just like a baseball team, you can cheer for your own Virgin Mary. So thank you for that question. Another question.
You gave a statistic early on about the number of people that have experienced miracles. What's that ratio?
80% of people in this survey that I read, 80% of Americans said that they've experienced one miracle or another. I don't think it follows that strict Lambertini criteria. Perhaps it's their favorite baseball team winning. Perhaps it's them finding their cell phone. But everybody has had an inexplicable thing in one form or another. And so it's inspiring that there are so many things that people find to be miraculous. Yeah. All right. Thank you so much for your attention today. I appreciate it.